What is up, guys? It is the Bluebloods coming at you with another episode of our Big 10 and 31 Days theme. And we are joined by Patrick Herb. He is the director of brand strategy for the Wisconsin Badgers and the sideline reporter for Wisconsin football. I just want to give you a shout out, man, for coming on and joining me today.
Hey, glad to be here. I'm in basketball season mode right now, so I got to shift my brain to football. But it's good to talk about football. Spring practice will be starting any day now.
Yeah, I know it's coming up quick. And, let's shift to the 2020 season. The Badgers finished 4-3, a big bowl win. But I don't know if there was a program more affected by COVID than this team. I mean, we saw right out of the gate everything get shut down. I don't even know if they had a quarterback on their roster without COVID. Did this season fall short, meet, or exceed your preseason expectations?
That's a great question. Well, I think you got to, before I even answer that, I think you have to go back to figuring out what expectations were. And the strangeness of the season predates even the games and that first, those first few weeks and when the COVID shutdown happened, that you got to remember the Big-10 canceled football. So during the summer, it was over. There was going to be no season. And so everybody shifted to, oh my goodness, now what? Like, I can't believe this. And then, things kind of changed, improved a little bit. I think that, things got reassessed and they came up with a way to play. And so then it was kind of like a new perspective. Everybody's playing with house money a little bit that, well, we weren't even expected to play at all. So now whatever we get is a bonus. So I think expectations kind of got recalibrated a little bit. That said, I don't think anybody was satisfied with a 4-3 season. I mean, not at all. I think that the expectations year in and year out at Wisconsin are higher than that. That they attest and expect New Year's Six bowls every year. Wisconsin has not made it to the championship, or the Final Four yet. Hopefully that's out there, that they could be a CFP team one of these years. So that's kind of the next rung on the ladder to climb, but they've been consistently in that New Year's Six, playing in Cotton Bowls and playing in Orange Bowls and Rose Bowls. And so that's the expectation. So when you go to the Duke's Mayo Bowl, it's a little bit of a I would say that's probably a little bit under expectations, but I couch that with the expectations were totally different this season. And so I think for a lot of people around the program, they viewed it as whatever we could play is kind of a gift this season, and ending it with a win over Minnesota, who's kind of the big rival, and retaining that Paul Bunyan's axe that's so big in that rivalry, and then winning a bowl game, no matter what bowl it is, that put a nice bow on the season at least, and hopefully is a springboard to next season.
Right. And I mean, you talk about the postponement of the season. August 11th was the date Kevin Warren came out, said no football. I believe it was 6 days after he puts together this conference-only schedule and then reverts back to canceling the season. Was Wisconsin one of the teams fighting back behind the scenes? We heard Nebraska. I mean, we had Greg Sharp on it. He said it strained the relationship. Nebraska was going to play football if they could. Was Wisconsin one of those teams? And what was your reaction to the initial decision?
Wisconsin, I believe that Wisconsin has been pretty conservative in terms of COVID, I would say, as a school, as an institution. I think we've tried to be pretty responsible about it. So I don't think Wisconsin was one of the voices really pushing for a season. I think that, Barry Alvarez is a very influential voice in that room. And he's a former football coach. So the football season is sacred to him. So I think he really wanted to have a season, and he was crushed when it was canceled. I mean, he said as much that he had a sick feeling in his stomach when the decision was made, but he understood it. He really did. And so Wisconsin wasn't one of the vocal ones. I know Nebraska and Ohio State were probably the two most outspoken. But I know that Barry Alvarez wanted to have a season, and he wanted it for the guys. His grandson is on the team. It's a finite amount of seasons that these guys have when they're in college. And if you take one of them away, it could be 25% of their college experience. So it was important to try to find a pathway forward. And he was on the committee, if you remember, to figure out the scheduling and how to make this work. And so what is the path back to having a season? So he was very influential in that, kind of representing Wisconsin. My initial reaction was disappointment, certainly. And I didn't disagree with it necessarily. Like, I understood what it was rooted in, that was at the time, nobody had really pulled off much of a successful season that wasn't in a bubble, and so it was hard to imagine doing a football season safely. But I'm grateful for what they were able to pull off, and now college basketball has taken that and done even better. The Badgers here, Wisconsin played 27 games. Like, I'm surprised. I would have guessed I would have thought 20 to 22 would have been a successful season. They got in all 27.
Yeah, it's huge. But, I want to shift to on the field stuff. We saw the Badgers losing arguably might be one of the greatest running backs in college football history, in Jonathan Taylor. They're replacing it. They had freshman Jalen Berger come in. That they never seem to have that it guy, though, down the stretch. Looking ahead, who are you tabbing that has the potential to be the next great Wisconsin running back?
I think Jalen Berger's got the skills. I do. I think he's a different runner than Jonathan Taylor. He does not have maybe the high end explosive speed. He runs a little more upright, maybe a little bit closer to the way Melvin Gordon runs the ball. A little more upright than JT. I don't want to put Melvin Gordon expectations on him, because he was one of the most decorated running backs in college football history. Yeah. So I don't want to put that on there. But I think he's got a chance to be special. I really do. But I don't know. It's so hard to say, because we didn't even think – no one knew Jonathan Taylor was going to be anything close to what he was. He was a good recruit, but he wasn't a five-star by any means. He came in as a freshman and was down on the depth chart, and then he had a couple practices that fall camp of his freshman year where anybody watching goes, whoa, this guy's different. I remember he took a short swing pass about 5 yards across the line of scrimmage, came over the middle, took a swing pass, and took it 70 yards to the house, like weaving through guys. And that was one of the first plays where you look at it and you go, okay, he's different. he's got a different gear that this kid's going to see the field right away. But prior to that, going into fall camp his freshman year, I don't even think he was part of the plan. And then he ended up having an incredible freshman year where he almost ran for 2,000 yards. So I've learned, especially at Wisconsin, where they have such a great success of running backs and have such an incredible offensive line that often makes the running backs so good, to never like discount anybody. Never say, that guy doesn't look like he's got it. So a guy like, guys like Nakia Watson and some of the freshmen that are coming in this year, I don't know. I just sit back and wait for it to unfold. I try not to predict.
I understand that offensive line is like, you could count on Wisconsin having good offensive linemen, but the quarterback position was an interesting one this year. Jack Cohen goes down with injury. Now he's transferred out. Graham Mertz steps up. My co-host, who's taking a leave right now, he thought Graham Mertz was arguably one of the best quarterbacks in the country. He is the biggest Graham Mertz fan, so I promised him I'd ask you about him. What do you think about Mertz as a quarterback, and what are your expectations for him moving forward?
I have high expectations for him, actually. I think he's a difference maker. His freshman year was a little bit up and down, and he would admit that too. And expectations have been high on him since he got to Wisconsin. The Badgers traditionally don't bring in big-time names at the quarterback position. Russell Wilson is the clear exception. He was a transfer from NC State, and he kind of broke the mold. Wisconsin has made a very successful living off of guys like Scott Tolzien, where they end up having a pro career, but probably as a backup, and they really get by on being extremely smart and cerebral, very accurate passer, very good at leading. I hate the term system quarterback or game manager. I hate to say that, because I think it's a little bit demeaning to the player that these are skilled quarterbacks, but they're often not first team all conference caliber, right? Or guys that you look at it at the end of the day and go, wow, they won because he threw for 320, 350 yards. So, but Mertz, being a highly, highly recruited, quarterback, has kind of stepped on campus immediately with different expectations. And And I think a lot was thrust on him early, that with Jack Cohn going down, they turned it over to Mertz maybe quicker than they had imagined as a program. But he handled it really well. He's got an it factor that you can't coach. So he's got confidence and moxie. He's a really good leader. His teammates really like him and they rally around him. He's got a big arm. He's not the most mobile quarterback, but he's smart and he's a playmaker. He's got a little bit of a gunslinger mentality, I think, that he didn't even show this year because I think he was trying to limit mistakes and did a decent job of that. But the other thing you have to consider about his year is the problems that Wisconsin had at wide receiver and the injuries that they had and the targets that he was throwing to. I mean, Jake Ferguson at tight end, really reliable, top end tight end who's got a future on Sundays, was a consistent threat all season. But beyond that, his wide receiver depth, they lost Danny Davis, Kendrick Pryor, and for almost all the season. And so to be able to, he was throwing to a bunch of former walk-ons and freshmen, to be honest. So I do think that had some impact on his ability to, make plays and put up big stats. And then he had COVID. He had COVID early on the season. I think that affected him. I think he talked about it, that he, COVID hits people in different ways. And some people have very mild to no symptoms. He had some, and he was open about that it put him down for a little bit. And, thankfully he recovered fully. But I think that was part of his freshman story too. But I have high hopes for him. I really do. I think, like I said, I think he's a difference maker at that position. Your co-host is smart.
Yeah, he said when healthy, Graham Mertz is a Heisman contender. That's how high he is on Mertz. So he's screamed even last year behind Jack Cohen that Wisconsin has to start Graham Mertz to be good. He's been on that train for a while. But
is he from Kansas City or something? That's where Graham Mertz is from, Kansas City.
No, he is from he lives in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and is a diehard LSU fan. He just loves Mertz as a quarterback. He said that he wished Mertz was at LSU, which they got some quarterback issues there right now. So, but
the interesting note about Jack Cohn transferring. So he went to Notre Dame, and Wisconsin is scheduled to play Notre Dame this season in Soldier Field. So that is setting up for some great theater in that game. That if Cohn wins the starting job there to face his old team, but there's no ill will there. Jack Cohn, great kid, great leader, understood that he needed a new opportunity, and I think the program understands it too. So it won't be there's animosity there, but it would make for some interesting theater if he's the starting quarterback for that game.
Yeah, that's huge. And I think you even saw that with like the Jalen Hurts transfer. With the transfer portal being so active, you're going to lose players. You can't fault a kid for doing what's best for his career. And Notre Dame had a big opening. Ian Book leaving might be one of the biggest losses for a team in the country. But looking at head coach Paul Chryst, he's entering his 7th year now, never finished lower than 3rd in the division, which was this year in a COVID year. And he's tied or outright won the division 3 times. What does he mean to the program, and how has he been so successful as the head coach of the Badgers?
Paul Chryst knows exactly who he is. He knows exactly what the program is and what the program values and its core values. And he unapologetically leans into both of those things. So he is not the rah-rah guy that's going to win a press conference. He's not the car salesman that's going to get the recruits because he's got this slick sales proposal. He also understands where Wisconsin's bread is buttered, that to sacrifice the things that have gotten Wisconsin to this level as a program, the winning the trenches, winning both lines of scrimmage, running the ball, taking care of the ball, developing from the inside out, the walk-on program, developing in-state Wisconsin talent, like finding these under-recruited offensive linemen that turn into first-round draft picks. And he's leaned into all of that because he came up through it. He's a Madison kid who went to school. Madison's kid. He's not a kid. He's older than me. He's a Madison native who went to school at UW, played at UW, and has now come back, and he understands the anthropology of Wisconsin, and he's got a personality that is super genuine, right? And the players love that. They feed off that. So he's not. I don't mean any of that as a criticism when I say he's not the salesman in the recruiting process, or he's not the rah-rah guy. He is successful because he does it his own way. And the play he's not a player's coach, but the players love him. They really do. They play hard for him, and they have great respect for him because he's true to who he is. He's never going to be try to pretend that he's something other than himself. And so I respect that a lot. I think he's a perfect fit for Wisconsin. And, Wisconsin went through when Brett Bielema had a terrific run at Wisconsin. When he left to go to Arkansas, Gary Anderson replaced Brett Bielema for 2 seasons. And Gary Anderson was a hire outside of the tree, if you will. He was a little bit out of left field, that he had come from Utah State, didn't have a connection to the Big-10, didn't have a connection to Wisconsin. And Wisconsin was successful for those 2 seasons under Anderson. But Anderson leaving to go to Oregon State was probably mutually beneficial in that Anderson, some of the things that he wanted to do at Wisconsin were different than the anthropology of the program, I would say. And so he found a different opportunity where he could do some things he wanted to do, and it allowed Wisconsin to go back and get Paul Chryst from Pitt and continue that anthropology, the same bedrock that the program has been built on for almost 30 years now. Barry Alvarez came in 1989, and they started seeing success in 92. Excuse me. So almost 30 years now. That bedrock is what Paul Chryst has taken and excelled with that same ideology.
Right. And, you say he's not a salesperson, but he just signed the number 15 class in the country, according to 247. National Signing Day wrapped up last month. You talk about O-line. Y'all got some O-linemen, 3 top 150 recruits, all over 6'7", all over 290 at 18
Monsters.
years old. Those are not anyone you just want to walk up to in an alley somewhere, because those are some big kids. But what were the biggest positional needs for the Badgers this recruiting class? And what are your thoughts on just this class as a whole as they start arriving to campus?
Yeah, I think you make a good point, and I'm glad you did, about the fact that he isn't a salesman for recruiting, but he is a good recruiter. I think you're right in that the recruiting, particularly over the last 2-3 seasons, has increased in terms of rankings, if you will. Right. I don't know. I don't get too caught up in that. I really don't, and because especially at a program like Wisconsin, that it traditionally hasn't mattered, right? Wisconsin's blueprint has not been to chase the 4- and 5-star kids, and they've instead tried to sprinkle some of those in with the walk-ons who become great players, and or the 3-star undervalued kids. They often, as a recruiting pitch, they often talk about trying to get kids who chose football that didn't have football choose them. So philosophically, if you maybe I'll explain that even a little more. So there's a lot of kids who are really good at football because they're just naturally gifted and talented, and that's their opportunity to play at a high level and get a scholarship and maybe make a living off doing it. Then there are kids who went out of their way to say, well, I'm a decent athlete, but I love football, and so I'm going to make myself a great football player. And those are the kids who chose football. And believe me, you can be really successful with a team full of kids who football chose them. I mean, Wisconsin would love to get as many 5-stars as they can. But that's often a recruiting philosophy of finding those kids who chose football. And so, but now what you're starting to see over the last 2-3 recruiting classes, they're still getting those kids who they think are the undervalued 3-stars that are going to develop into NFL players. But then they're starting to sprinkle in a little more of the 4- and 5-stars. And if you could do that successfully and integrate that and raise the overall maybe athleticism, overall speed of the program, now you're talking about being in that same class as the teams competing for the CFP every year. And Wisconsin's been right there. I mean, they're right on that edge, like I said before, of playing in January 6 bowls, but January 1 bowls, but not CFP caliber. You start mixing in the speed, athleticism of those 4 or 5 stars with the bedrock that you've already got. Now you're knocking on that door. And so I'm I'm a homer, right? I'm part of the program, but I think that I think that they're getting closer to that. I do, and I think the last few seasons have been important in that way.
Right. And I mean, I think you see that. I mean, the whole Big Ten, there's like a big second group right there behind Ohio State that are really
Right.
on the come up, that are just like one step away. But when Ohio State's landing perfectly rated recruits every single year and they have 10 of them, it's just so hard to
They're in a
compete.
little different class. Yeah.
Exactly. As an Auburn fan, I get it watching Georgia and Alabama do what they do, but I want to shift to next season. I mean, we see some young guys coming in. That you guys lost some starters. Who are some players we might not know about right now that you think could break out and really shine next year?
Uh, well, it's interesting. I think Wisconsin had a few players come back that were maybe a little bit surprising. I think the tight end Jake Ferguson, who he's a name. I think people know who he is. That's not wouldn't necessarily be a sleeper that people haven't heard of. But I think his best football is in front of him. I think he's an NFL tight end. I really do. And I'm not just saying that because his grandfather's my boss, but I do think that the Graham Mertz Ferguson connection could be really potent, and I think he could take a big step up. I think there's a couple offensive linemen that are young, just monsters, and that might get an opportunity, like guys named like Logan Brown, Jack Nelson, potentially some of these freshmen that came in. Trey Wittig is another one, and then some true freshmen that are just getting on campus this summer or this spring. So the offensive line, I think, is going to be as deep as Wisconsin's had in a long time. But offensive line doesn't sell newspapers. That's not the flashy. That's not the flashy one. It'll be interesting to see the running back position. You asked earlier about who's the next great running back, and I think for Wisconsin to be elite, they're going to want to find not necessarily a workhorse running back, because they don't need a guy to carry it 200 times necessarily, but it'd be nice to have a feature back, that game changer. And so can Jalen Berger be that, is a question. I think linebacker Nick Herbig, he played as a true freshman this year as an outside linebacker from Hawaii, 4-star kid that was a pretty big recruit, pretty big get for Wisconsin. I think he is a star. I think he is a superstar in the making, and he's a guy that, Wisconsin's had a really good outside linebacker legacy recently of guys, like TJ Watt is probably the most recognizable one now because he's turned himself into one of the best NFL players on the defensive side of the ball. But there's a pretty long list of outside linebackers over the last 6-7 years having a lot of NFL success, and he projects to be the next one of those. It's just a really athletic, versatile, great instincts at the outside linebacker position. And then I think that there's a couple corners, a couple cornerbacks like Faion Hicks, Caesar Williams that have a athleticism to be able to play at the next level. Also, that Wisconsin's defense is going to be nasty again. That's a calling card of this program the last few years, and they're going to be nasty. And one thing that they haven't necessarily been is big ball hawking. Taking the ball away, playmaking defense. They've been like we're just going to make it hard for you to move the ball, as opposed to big impact turnover plays. I think that might increase this season. I think there's a couple playmakers on that back end that might emerge a little bit with interceptions and big plays in that.
Right. I mean, and based on this schedule, man, which I think is manageable, I see Wisconsin having a very, very good shot to win this division again. There are some tough games against Penn State, Notre Dame along the line. Michigan, I don't really know. It depends on what they do with the quarterback position there. But with these potential breakout players, with this schedule, what do you think the ceiling and or floor could be for this 2021 team?
Well, what's interesting about all the teams that you named that Wisconsin's got those games, they're all at home. Yeah. Penn State, home. Iowa, home. Michigan, home. Nebraska, I don't know if Nebraska's, maybe that's just a reputation thing from previous names, but they're at home.
Yeah.
So with Wisconsin's toughest game, other than Notre Dame, that's a neutral game at Soldier Field, and that the tickets are going to be split pretty evenly. That won't feel like a road game by any means. There'll be a ton of red in that stadium. So because I think Wisconsin's going to have a pretty good team, but two, the schedule is favorable. They don't have Ohio State, and they don't have road games against some of the perennial powers of the conference. That I think the ceiling's really high. I really do. I I hate to talk about the floor, but even in a down season for Wisconsin, it's hard to envision more than 3 losses.
Yeah.
I think that I don't get into Vegas odds at all, and I try to avoid it as much as I can, even looking at that kind of stuff. But if the over under for Wisconsin wins next year is not pretty high, 8.5, 9, I'd be surprised.
Yeah. I completely agree. I think they could definitely make a run for a Big 10 title. Ohio State's replacing a quarterback, probably going to be starting a young kid, CJ Stroud. So that's going to be interesting. But man, last question here. I haven't made it to a game. Camp Randall is very high on my list of stadiums I want to come see a game at. What makes the environment of Madison, Camp Randall Stadium such a unique environment on game days?
Well, you do need to get up there. So you're down in SEC country. How many
Yeah.
SEC stadiums have you been to?
Almost all of them.
Almost all of them. So
Yeah, yeah, and we have
what's your favorite not named Auburn?
man, as hard as shocking as it might be, I really think Georgia and what they're doing over there
Really?
in Athens, that is probably the loudest stadium I've been to because I was there for the Tennessee game where they hit the Hail Mary against Georgia, and people forget right
Mm.
before that they hit a Hail Mary type play, and man, it was deafening. And shockingly, Ole Miss is really high up there too. Ole Miss was an amazing
Yep.
environment, and they showed up for that game, and they were not very good when I went, but they packed it out. They were extremely loud, and that's might be the most beautiful campus I've ever been to.
I've heard that. I've actually never been to a SEC home game. Wisconsin. I don't know the last time that Wisconsin played at an SEC team. They've played LSU and Alabama in neutral site games over the last few years, and
Yeah,
obviously some bowl games. But that's on my bucket list to get down there to some of those. So, but shifted as a SEC fan, you understand that what but one of the things that makes SEC football so special is the same thing that Big 10 football does. Is that much to your point of Ole Miss, the stadium being electric and the fans turning out for a game even when their team wasn't very good. The Big 10 sees that too. That Penn State had a down year, but they're still putting, but they could down period they had, right? But they're still putting 100,000 people in that venue, and we see it in football and basketball in the conference. That thankfully Wisconsin hasn't had many down years, but I promise that if Wisconsin did, we'd still be having 70 to 80,000 people in an 80,000 seat stadium. And one of the reasons that Madison and Camp Randall in particular is so special is that the game is important, but the party is maybe more important, or the
yeah,
social gathering. I talked about the anthropology of Wisconsin football and the legacy and the bedrock that's built on the game day environment in Camp Randall Stadium. The anthropology of Badger fans with that is built on is interesting too. And you may not know some of the history. So prior to Barry Alvarez, Wisconsin football was terrible. I mean, we're talking 2 wins, 2-9 seasons, 1-10. That's some really, really lean decades. And
right.
even with those, Camp Randall was jumping, and it was an event, and the student section was just a chaos, and people would come just for the environment because the football prize they wouldn't care. So there's a fifth quarter band concert where the band takes over the field and plays this wild fifth quarter, and people would have more fun and pay more attention to the fifth quarter than they would the games. So there's this anthropology of doesn't matter what happens on the field. We're going to come, and it's the biggest family reunion, every Saturday. And the people in my section are all I know them because I've been sitting with them for years. And then all of a sudden, the team got good and got really good, and that environment and that social element of like the culture of just being there for a good time, and the pregame starts the night before, and the postgame goes long after. That all stayed. But then all of a sudden you piled on a really good team and a really good program, and now you've got this perfect storm of there's no place you'd rather be on
Right.
Saturdays than Camp Randall. So that makes it really fun. The other thing that's super unique about it is Camp Randall Stadium is plunked right down in the middle of a neighborhood. similar to what Lambeau Field and the charm of Lambeau Field in Green Bay, Wisconsin is that Camp Randall is that too. It's on the edge of the campus and right in the middle of a neighborhood. And so there's no parking. The parking is hard. You got to find like these satellite lots. There's one ramp right next door, but if you're not a high donor, you can't get in there anyway. So people are parking in the yards of the houses, and people are, I think people make thousands of dollars selling off the grass in front of their house. And then tailgating just spans all over the 1 mile radius in every direction, because there is no general big parking lot, and people love to tailgate in Wisconsin. So Brewers games at Miller Park, huge parking lot. And so people tailgate and it's all right there. Camp Randall, it's all over the place. You just walk through neighborhoods and walk around the streets, and there's just this communal party of music and brats and grill smoke and beer bongs and all of these things like mixing together, that the game is like, yeah, we'll go into the game. That'll be great. But I'm here for the pregame and the postgame as much as anything. And so there's a charm in that is unique, where it isn't this giant stadium plunked in a huge parking lot. It's this giant stadium plunked in this little community. And that's a really cool element that Camp Randall has and makes it unique.
Right. And I agree with that. I'm at K-State now in the graduate program here, and their stadium is just in a parking lot randomly off the side of the road. And I'm like, it gives you a spot to tailgate, but coming from Auburn, ours is right in the middle of campus. Like my classes, every single class I had, you could just about see the stadium from the window of whatever classroom you were in. And so there's places to tailgate, like you said, miles radius. So Big-10 compared to Big-12, a lot different. SEC compared to Big-12, a very different depending on where you are. But man, I had a blast. I love talking football. Wisconsin is one of the most interesting programs year in and year out. And so we appreciate you coming on. Where can our fans find you? Anything you want to plug? I know you're covering the basketball team right now, so that should be a blast. But I'm going to give you some time to let our listeners know where they can find you.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. I enjoyed it too. If you ever get up to Madison, Zach, you got to let me know, and
for sure,
we'll make sure you have a good time. But that's not hard to find a good time in Madison. Yeah. I mean, if people are interested in following the Badgers, we'll take all comers. If some of these SEC fans want a Big-10 to root for, we're not like the evil empire like Ohio State. We're kind of the quirky, plucky, hardworking team up in Wisconsin. So we got room for many bandwagon fans that want to have a Big-10 team to root for. Our social media accounts are at Badger Football and at Badger MBB is our basketball one. Those are kind of our sports specific ones, and our social media team does a great job of bringing access inside the program and showing off the personalities that make Wisconsin unique and those atmosphere, culture characteristics that make game day so cool. So I appreciate you letting me plug those, but we're open to all SEC fans.
Oh man, I love it. Like I said, my co-host is a diehard LSU fan living in Baton Rouge. He calls himself on the podcast the honorary Wisconsin fan. So he's probably following.
Did he come up to Lambeau when LSU played Wisconsin and Green Bay a couple years ago?
I don't think so. He didn't come up there. He's a season ticket holder now, but we were still. I'm assuming, I don't remember what year it was. We were either just out of high school or he was probably still in college down at the University of Mobile. So but me and him have talked about, we have stadiums on our list. I actually had tickets to Clemson Notre Dame last year. COVID wiped everything out. So I have a lot of stadiums on my list. I'll be in Penn State this year though, because Auburn goes up to Penn State, and I promised myself. Yeah, I promised myself I would never miss that game, and I have a lot of Big-10 schools on my list now. Now that I'm in Kansas, it's kind of driving distance to a few of them. So I have a lot of plans to hit some Big-10 stadiums.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a lot of great ones, a lot of huge stadiums in the Big-10. But that game at Lambeau will be one of the ones that I always remember. Wisconsin won in dramatic fashion against a really good LSU team, but I remember the LSU fans too, how memorable it was, and they brought their band, and their band marched around in the pregame outside the stadium, kind of did like a little parade, and and there was a string of RV campers coming up from the southeastern part of the country, just driving all the way up to Green Bay, because that was certainly a bucket list type of game for an LSU fan to be able to not only play the Badgers, which doesn't happen that often, but to see Lambeau Field, which is like that's a palace in itself. So I don't know when the next time that's going to happen, but hopefully, I hope it does, because we were supposed to play Notre Dame there this year in Lambeau, and COVID canceled that one. That was a 2-year in Lambeau last year, and then Soldier Field this year, and by the grace of God, we'll get normal football with full stadiums this fall, I hope.
Man, I hope. I have a lot of plans, but I appreciate you joining me, man. Guys, this is a wrap. Make sure to find Patrick. Make sure to follow the Badgers through the tournament and this fall for football. But we are out. For myself, for Patrick, for the Blue Bloods, we are out.